Well, let's speak further then about the upcoming G20 Leaders Summit guest list or attendance register. Let's bring in political analyst Angelo Fick. Angelo, always good to have you on the SABC. Welcome back. Let's start with the remarks made by Minister and the Presidency, Kumbuzo Ntshabeni, on the issue of President Donald Trump confirming that he will not be coming to the meeting, based once again on these unsubstantiated claims of a white Afrikaner genocide in the country. Ntshabeni using the phrase, "It's neither here nor there." Is she right?
Well, in some senses, that is going to be the position, that the summit will go ahead. This is not like the UN General Assembly. This is not a decision-making body. This is a body of consultation, out of which some recommendations may be made. But this is also, as she pointed out, not the first time that the United States has pulled out of these multilateral situations. Let's not forget that when the Paris Climate Accords are being negotiated, Donald Trump was in his first presidency and also withdrew. What I think is different now is that a new global order is now very messily being either engendered and the old one is coming apart. And so this feels more seismic than it would have even 3 or 4 years ago. But for the most powerful economy and the most powerful military state not to be present at the G20 is indeed significant. It isn't much of a muchness. It sends a signal. The question is, will the institutions survive the United States' withdrawal, given that they take over the presidency in 2026? Or is this the beginning of the end for the G20 as a formation?
And just on that last point, if this is possibly the beginning of the end of the road for the G20, and what you said earlier regarding a possible new world order being created, being crafted at this point, who sits where in terms of the powerful countries of the world and the sets of allies, shall we say, that we're seeing take shape at the moment?
Well, there are multiple formations, and some of those formations have economic but not military ones. And then there are ones that have military ties and economic ones. So we know that there are economic ties between Russia and India, but we also know that India and China have conflict, not least over water sources in the Himalayas. We know that there are some concerns of India's very close relationship historically with the United States and now also with Israel. And we also know that these military realignments, somehow linked to but aren't necessarily mirrors of the economic realignments. So what we're likely to see is the countries inside BRICS at the G20 using this opportunity to, again, signal to everybody, including their European partners, exactly what it is the G20 wishes to achieve. The United States may wish to reinvent itself as a monopolar leader of the world, as it did in the 1990s. But my sense is that those conditions are not possible, given what we've seen China in its bilateral relationship with the United States being able to achieve and getting Donald Trump to back down from some of his particular positions in even the shorter and longer term.
And someone else, Angelo, who's not going to be in South Africa next week is the president of China. President Xi is not going to be coming. Yes, there will be representation, but I wonder if his absence from the G20 leaders meeting is perhaps more curious than Trump's, given the context and the history with the South African government of late. But also, should it be interpreted as a snub?
I think we should be very careful about, sort of looking for signs and wonders where there aren't any. This is not the first summit that President Xi has not attended. He also didn't go to the one in India, and he sent his premier to that one as well. We know that President Xi has limited his abroad travel and has actually gone on a diplomatic set of tours that involved leaders coming to him, including Vladimir Putin, who went to China. So my sense is that this is perhaps to do with China's internal issues. And the Chinese government actually released a very strongly worded statement suggesting, or not even suggesting, but stating that they supported the South African state in its presidency of the G20 and will send its highest delegation that is not the head of state to this. So I don't think this is a sign that China is realigning away from BRICS or away from its South African partner in BRICS, or away from its global south priorities in its standoff with other global north countries like the European Union, Japan and the United States.
And what does the G20 then as a formation have to do to survive some of what's been unfolding as we've been discussing now?
So I think what has to happen is all of the international institutions will have to be revisited and rethought, particularly as there are some very, very important and militarily and economically powerful players that simply thumb their nose at the order of international law. And Philippe Sands has pointed out in one of his earlier books, Lawless World, that several of the people who drew up the architecture of the post-World War II global order have over the last 40 years been the ones to most vociferously and quite carelessly violate it. And the United States chief of that, whether it was on trade relationships that it had found was ruled against at the International Trade Court in favor of Nicaragua, or whether it is its position on Cuba, or whether it is now its increasing position on a variety of international conflicts. So I think one has to be quite aware that this is going to be a very messy period ahead of us, and the lines are not going to be simply and easily drawn, because part of this has to do that President Xi Jinping has a very large and growing population of middle-class consumers that depend on a series of resources that have to come from those economies that are currently in complex relationships with China, but also with the West, with Western Europe, and with the North American states like Canada and the United States. And those will have to be unbundled. And as that happens, these states, including South Africa and many of the countries in Africa, want a bigger stake in saying how that new architecture is going to be, designed, so that they do not return to those positions they had in the 19th century of simply providing raw material, whether it is human raw material or whether it is minerals or food, and also that these are no longer quite as unfair as they used to be. And that may mean reforming the institutions that we know. That includes the G20. And let's not forget, the G grouping has been reconfigured in various ways, the G9, G7, G20. So the numbers can differ, but I think what's going to be much more important is for global South countries, particularly as concerns the climate catastrophe, to be able to negotiate favorable terms where their concerns are not just secondary, tertiary, or even negligible.
Angelo Fick, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us on The Full View. Political analyst Angelo Fick speaking to us about the upcoming G20 leaders meeting.